In a moment that could reshape the course of the Gaza conflict, White House Special Envoy Steve Witkoff is set to meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in New York. According to two officials familiar with the development, the meeting is part of a coordinated diplomatic effort to push forward a breakthrough deal. Netanyahu is also expected to meet President Donald Trump at the White House tomorrow, a high-stakes session that many believe will determine the next chapter of this long-running crisis. The talks come as President Trump has projected confidence about the peace process, declaring that a peace deal for Gaza is close to being finalized. The centerpiece of the negotiations is a 21-point plan designed to achieve a ceasefire, secure the release of hostages, and establish a framework for post-war governance in the embattled territory. To understand the implications of this fast-moving story, CNN spoke with David Sanger, political and national security analyst and New York Times White House and national security correspondent. Sanger offered an unvarnished look at both the promise and the challenges of the moment, the regional landscape and core obstacles. Sanger noted that Arab nations in the region appear broadly supportive of the US-led plan, at least in its general outline. But, he cautioned, the real test lies with the Israeli leadership. Addressing the central question, Sanger said, one is, will the Prime Minister sign on? And I suspect he will, because he's betting that Hamas will collapse and he'll be able to continue his operation in Gaza City. At the very heart of the 21-point plan is a stark requirement. The first point is that Hamas releases all 48 hostages, 20 of those who are alive, and the remainder, sadly, are not. Sanger explained that this demand could dramatically alter the balance of power. At that point, Hamas has got no leverage left, and it's very hard to understand why they would do that if they think the Israelis would turn around and eviscerate the leadership in Gaza City, which is what's going on now. The analysts turned to the profound human cost of the conflict, underscoring that the crisis is now at an unprecedented scale. We're at a point where 90% of Gazans have been displaced in some way, where the humanitarian crisis is immense. He highlighted a glaring omission in the plan. There's nothing in the plan that addresses, ultimately, a Palestinian answer. Diplomats and humanitarian organizations have echoed this concern, stressing that without a roadmap for Palestinian self-governance and recovery, any peace initiative risks being fragile and temporary. Sanger pointed out that while the plan has gathered cautious support in parts of the Arab world, the issue of Israeli annexation of the West Bank remains a potential deal-breaker. Several Arab leaders have signaled that any such move by Israel could unravel the fragile alignment that has been built in support of the deal. This has placed President Trump in a delicate position. Sanger observed, the president was pretty clear, he said, I will not allow them to annex the West Bank, basically saying this conflict can't spread further. But Sanger added an important caveat. Prime Minister Netanyahu has rightly figured out that President Trump is not really interested very much in enforcing past commands of what Israel would or would not do. So I'm not sure how seriously he will take that. Perhaps he will take it quite seriously. One of the recurring themes in the interview was President Trump's inconsistent involvement in global conflicts. Sanger remarked, the president himself, oddly enough, moves from sort of an observer status. This isn't my conflict. He says this about Israel and Gaza. He says it about Ukraine with Russia, to episodically trying to go dive in, inserting himself. So he kind of ping-pongs between these two positions. And it's not clear right now how committed he is to making this happen. This unpredictability has raised doubts among allies and adversaries alike about Washington's long-term commitment. As Sanger put it, there are times again in both conflicts where he seems to enjoy being mediator-in-chief, and others where he, again, likes to back away when things get tense. Perhaps the most complex question hanging over the negotiations is how Gaza will be governed once the guns fall silent. Reports have circulated that former British Prime Minister Tony Blair might take on a leading role in guiding the post-war transition. Sanger shared insights into these discussions. Some of the proposals that are out there, initially the United States, under the Biden administration, said the Palestinian Authority should run it. And then, who rejected that? And certainly the Palestinian Authority has had its challenges running what it's doing right now, including in the West Bank. As a result, new models are being explored. So then there's been thoughts about having a sort of technocratic government set up with the aid of some of the Arab states, overseen, as you said, by Tony Blair in the initial stages. but it's unclear exactly what the relationship of that would be to the Palestinian Authority, how many of those people would be Palestinians themselves, and whether or not they would be willing to be governed that way. A major sticking point remains Prime Minister Netanyahu's position on Hamas and its role, or lack thereof, in Gaza's future. Sanger explained Prime Minister Netanyahu, based on his previous statements, would tell you that Hamas would be a threat to such a state, and he'd have to go out and wipe out the Hamas leadership anyway to avoid it from toppling any authority that was then set up. This reflects a long-standing Israeli concern that any transitional government in Gaza could be undermined if Hamas retains influence in the territory. The upcoming White House meeting between Netanyahu and Trump is being described as a very, very consequential meeting, one that could set the tone for the region's future. Sanger underscored the gravity of the moment. All eyes are going to be on a very, very consequential meeting at the White House tomorrow for this conflict. The discussion will not only address the immediate ceasefire and hostage issues, but also attempt to map out the long-term governance and security framework for Gaza. This phase of diplomacy represents one of the most serious efforts in years to bring about a ceasefire and chart a post-war path for Gaza. Yet the road ahead remains deeply challenging. First, the humanitarian emergency in Gaza, with massive displacement and widespread shortages of food, water and medical supplies, underscores the urgency of action but also complicates negotiations. Second, the absence of a clear plan for Palestinian political representation and governance threatens to undermine the legitimacy of any agreement reached. Third, the regional dimension, especially Arab states' insistence that Israeli annexation of West Bank territories must be off the table, adds another layer of complexity to the fragile talks. Finally, the uncertainty surrounding President Trump's diplomatic engagement raises questions about whether the United States can provide the steady leadership required to steer all parties toward a lasting settlement. For now, the world's attention is fixed on Washington, where tomorrow's meeting between Trump and Netanyahu could either solidify a roadmap for peace or see yet another promising opportunity slip away. The stakes are high. The release of hostages could help build momentum for wider agreements. A ceasefire could offer a desperately needed reprieve for Gaza's civilian population. A credible and inclusive post-war governance plan could lay the foundation for longer-term stability. Yet, success will depend on the willingness of all sides, Israel, Hamas, regional Arab partners, and the United States, to compromise and act on their commitments. As the CNN anchor concluded in the interview, David Sanger, thank you so much for sharing your expertise. As always, appreciate it. Sanger's insights reflect the fragile balance of hope and doubt that defines this moment, a reminder that peace, however close it may seem, is never guaranteed until it is signed, implemented and sustained.